We'll now be favored to hear a few minutes from Robert Mendenhall. I saw him here a minute ago. There he is. President Emeritus of Western Governors University, was really the first president and the innovator of some really interesting educational opportunities for a lot of students across the country. So Robert, welcome.
It's great to be in an innovations summit. WGU, Western Governors University, as many of you know, was actually created by governors, by 19 governors, led by Governor Mike Leavitt here in Utah, specifically to meet workforce needs. So in the mid-90s, the governors were hearing from employers that they were hiring individuals from the universities and then spending 6 months and $50,000 training them to do something. And the idea was, couldn't we align higher education a little bit better to employer workforce needs? At the same time, I think the goal was to make higher education more affordable and more accessible, but specifically more responsive to employer needs. And there were two great innovations that were kind of the basis of WGU, which still define what we do today. The first was to use technology to change the way we deliver education, and in particular to change the economics of higher education. You've heard today on various panels, you know already from your own experience, technology has changed virtually every industry in America except education. In education, it's just an add-on cost. So we add computers to what we're doing, and then we keep doing what we've always done in the same way we've always done it, with the same faculty-student ratios, and it doesn't matter whether you apply this to K-12 or to higher education. Technology is an add-on cost. In industry, it's changed the productivity by changing the way we do business. So that was a goal of the university. The bigger innovation was what we call competency-based education, and that means simply, let's actually define with industry the competencies they desire in a graduate. And let's define and measure those competencies and not graduate students until they have the competencies. But by the same token, let's not have them sit through classes for 4 months when they actually have the competencies and could demonstrate them much more quickly. Competency-based education is based on the idea that people come to higher ed knowing different things, and we all learn at different rates. In fact, you and I learn different subjects at different rates. And yet we have a higher ed system that says every class takes 4 months. You sit there for 4 months, and then if you learn a lot, you get an A, and if you don't learn very much, you get a D. But either way, you move on. And ultimately, what does a C really mean? Does it mean you're totally competent in half the competencies or half competent in all the competencies? Basically, it means you're not yet competent. So in competency-based education, we essentially hold the learning constant and let the time vary, rather than holding the time constant and letting the learning vary. We define the competencies with industry councils. We develop assessments to measure those competencies, some combination of objective tests and performance tests and portfolios. And when students demonstrate they have the competency, they graduate, independent of how long it took them. Obviously, it's particularly applicable to working adults who have been in the workforce, who have developed competencies, who really don't want to go back and sit through classes and materials that they already know. The result of all of that, both the technology and competency-based education, is that WGU is a private, nonprofit institution, but we're self-sustaining on tuition of $6,000 a year. So education doesn't have to cost $25,000 a year and ring up really large student debts. On average, students graduate with a bachelor's degree in 2.5 years, rather than the national average is now 5 years. Simply by freeing them up to demonstrate what they know and allowing students to spend their time learning what they don't know. We have today, nationally, obviously we're based in Utah, we have 70,000 students. We'll graduate 20,000 this year. We're still growing about 20% a year. And we offer only degrees that lead to specific workforce requirements. Bachelor's and master's degrees in just 4 areas. IT, so we've heard a lot about IT and technology needs. Healthcare, teacher education, and business. So I was just mapping our degrees against the chart that our workforce system showed, and a lot of those jobs are covered by those degrees. We will need, in this country, 1 million new teachers in the next 10 years and 1 million new nurses in the next 10 years. Obviously, in Utah, we have a significant teacher shortage, which has already been alluded to. Not only do we do teacher education, we are by far the largest provider of math and science STEM teachers in the country. We graduated last year 15% of all the master's prepared math and science teachers in the whole country, and 5% of all the bachelor's prepared math and science teachers in the whole country. So how does this work in practice? We have partnered with both states and companies and school districts specifically to meet workforce needs. So interesting that Governor Pence will be here later today. In Indiana, we created, they essentially private labeled WGU as the 8th state university in Indiana. This was done by Governor Mitch Daniels when he was the governor. It's been continued by Governor Pence. We actually have currently a $500,000 grant from the Indiana Workforce Department to focus on high-need areas of teachers and nurses within the state, to do outreach to populations in primarily rural areas that have significant shortages. Some of that will provide scholarships to those students to enable them to access the education. We've also created state WGUs in Washington, Texas, Tennessee, Missouri, and Nevada. I'm often asked why we don't have a, quote, state WGU in Utah, and the answer is we're in Utah. You have all of WGU here, and in fact, we have more students per capita in Utah than in any other state, due to the support we've had of really all of the governors since Governor Leavitt, and we appreciate Governor Herbert serving on our board and working with us. We've worked with the workforce system here and in Indiana and in Texas and in Washington. Maybe more significantly for many of you are our corporate partnerships. When we started, for example, the College of Health, we partnered with HCA, Kaiser Permanente, Tenet. We've now partnered with IHC and a number of other, Cedars-Sinai and a number of other major healthcare partners who actually define the competencies for the degrees and then actively promote this to their employees. So we've got 400 or 500 IHC employees. I think we now have about 1,500 HCA employees as students pursuing degrees in nursing or health IT or healthcare management. We've partnered with school districts like the Clark County School District in Las Vegas that has a big teacher shortage to train paraprofessionals and others in the community. Interesting thing, we got a $3 million grant a couple years ago from the U.S. Department of Labor, specifically for rural math and science teachers. So one of the great problems we have in this country is we educate teachers in suburban areas and then we tell them we'll forgive their student loans if they'll go teach in a rural district for 2 or 3 years. And we essentially condemn our rural school districts to high teacher turnover, teachers who will teach there for 2 or 3 years and then leave, as opposed to educating people whose roots are already in those communities and who are willing, not only willing, but anxious to live in that community for the rest of their lives and serve there. And that was a very successful project that we did. Finally, we continue to develop new degrees to meet workforce needs. So in the past year or two, we've, on the IT area, have new degrees in data analytics using big data, and in cybersecurity, which are obviously big IT needs. Maybe very significantly, we worked with Governor Levitt and his healthcare team to develop new degrees in integrated healthcare management to train individuals really for value-based healthcare as we transition from fee-for-service into value-based care, which is a fundamental shift in healthcare. And we really don't have people trained in what that will require to make that happen. Finally, and maybe most importantly, we measure our success based obviously on student retention and graduation, but ultimately on employment of the students and employer satisfaction with our graduates. So I'm happy to report that our employment outcomes for our students are significantly higher than the national averages. Maybe more significantly for us, 100% of employers of our graduates say our graduates were prepared for the jobs. 92% say they exceed the expectations they had for those graduates as they've worked in industry. So what does this mean? Generally, I think there are challenges in the higher education system from a federal financial aid standpoint and regulatory standpoint to move towards measuring learning rather than measuring time. The whole financial aid system is based on how much time you spend as opposed to whether you learn anything or not. There are challenges in terms of using the technology. There are actually regulations about how much direct faculty time is required with students as opposed to recognizing that the technology actually can individualize to every individual student and let them learn at their own pace, which we can't do with a classroom of 30, much less 200 students and a faculty member. So we hope, we know a number of universities are adopting competency-based education. I think as employers support defining those competencies and supporting the measurement of those competencies, that it represents a fundamental shift in higher education that will better meet workforce needs. Thanks.
Thanks, Robert. Well done, and we appreciate your contribution. We're now having another panel discussion. I'd like him to come on up. It's going to be led by State Senator Ann Millner, who's the moderator, Larry Richardson, president of the LDS Business College, Deneece Huftalin, president of Salt Lake Community College, Mike Bouwhuis, president of Davis Applied Technology College. Come on up, and Steve Hood, vice president of Snow College. So I'll turn the time over to Ann.
Thank you all very much. Okay, our panelists are gathered. Thank you very much. As you have all heard today, the theme is Utah's economy is booming. And that creates challenges for us, incredible opportunities, but also challenges. Because what's really important is how do we continue to sustain this growth? How do we make Utah a prosperous community, not just now, but in the future? It's my belief that that really focuses singularly on our talent. I often say to people, we don't see companies move to Silicon Valley or to Boston because it's an easy place to do business and there's not much regulation and costs are low. They go because of the talent pool. Well, I believe that we have every opportunity in the state of Utah to create an exceptional talent pool that will continue to grow our economy in this area, to build our prosperity, and to support our families with family-sustaining jobs that will allow us to maintain the unique culture and nature of Utah. So we have some panelists today who are really in the trenches on this work. They're really focused on how do we develop this talent? How do we do it in a way that's responsive to industry in our area? How do we make sure that our pipelines are full? And there are lots of challenges and opportunities with this. What I'm going to ask them to start with is a question that's really focused on giving you a sense of some of the things that they're doing already. What I'm hopeful is they'll keep those kind of answers a little bit short. It's always an opportunity to brag about your institutions, I know that. But to share the kernels of those ideas with us, because I'd also like to extend this conversation to talk about how do we think about this when we think about policy, both at state and federal level, what kinds of things do we need to do to help make a difference so that we can enable them to be able to even do more to help us accomplish this work? So let's start with for each of you, what are your institutions doing strategically right now? What's innovative that you're doing that allows you to help meet the workforce needs that we have right now in Utah and that we anticipate in the next few years? And I'm going to start with Mike Bouwhuis, if that's okay. We'll just jump this around.
All right. It's my pleasure to be here today, represent Davis Applied Technology College, but to also represent the system I'm involved with called Utah College of Applied Technology, with 33,000 students in 8 institutions across the state. And we are all dedicated to workforce development at the highest level. Innovation is something that we do a lot of in our institution. One of the things that we've done is we've created partnerships right on the campus with partners, industrial partners. For instance, Akuma Corporation is a partner with us, and they place equipment on our floor. They also bring in seminars to train the local employers on how to improve their output, how to improve their throughput. And so consequently, they use our equipment and their equipment, and they also use our talent, our students. We also have a very strong partnership with Lincoln Electric Corporation, where they provide equipment on our floor, over $1 million worth of equipment, which they change out every year. Our industrial partnerships locally include the aerospace pathway that we've talked about earlier, but also a great partnership that's been going on forever, just about, is a partnership with Hill Air Force Base called the Career Pathways Program, in which it's much like apprenticeship. Hill Air Force Base chooses an employee, they send them to our school with defined curriculum that we work out with them, and then they spend half their day at Hill Air Force Base and half of their day at our institution. And consequently, by combining those two, they get a worker immediately. They get to shop them for 2 years, or for anywhere from a year to 6 months to a year, and then they get to hire them. The student doesn't have to take the federal exam. But the bottom line in all partnerships is a phrase that I use wherever I go, and that's that we have to manufacture employees together. We can't work in silos anymore. The successful models you heard today, and you'll hear more, is we have to work together with partnerships. Partnerships is the key.
Okay, if we could move on, and Steve Hood, do you want to talk to us a little bit about what's happening in the Snow College area? And you're really serving kind of the rural area, a more rural area of our state, so be really interested in what you're doing.
That's right. We have a 6-county area right in central Utah, and it's been somewhat challenging because it is one of the areas in the state that actually has had contracted economic conditions for for almost a decade. One of the things that we're trying to do is we're trying to get students, we're putting a special emphasis on advising with students. We have some wonderful welding students, for example, young men and women that come into the program, they learn how to weld, and then they want to just go out and go to work right off. And what we're trying to do is convince them that they need to stay, get another degree, or go on to a 4-year institution and get a degree, because one of the things that they're learning is they can sometimes go to work for some of these companies, but they aren't able to stay employed necessarily. So many of them go back to their counties and so on. We want them to have an entrepreneurial spirit with them, so we want them to try to do that. The other thing that we're trying to do to help them out is Department of Workforce Services and other organizations have done lots of studies to ask employers what do they want. And right up there at the top, not only is STEM always requested, we want people in technology and so on, but also soft skills. This idea that students need to be able to communicate, to think innovatively, to work hard, to be problem solvers in a teamwork setting. So we're requiring students, whether they're in the technical arts and sciences or whether they're in liberal arts, to take a new course. It's a foundations course. It's interdisciplinary, to be able to learn these skills of teamwork, critical thinking. They break out of traditional disciplines and tend to look at things such as the engineered life. Our whole world is engineered, whether it's from the buildings that we're in, the chairs that we put our rear ends in, or the food that we eat is all at this level. And what we want students to do is to be able to think critically about that and to understand that they can make a difference in this world. And as they do that, they begin to think more innovatively, and they start to think more about how they can make a difference in their own lives and in their careers that they have.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Now I'm going to go to Deneece Huftalin, who's at Salt Lake Community College and has 60,000 students and serving a need there. How are you responding to this challenge?
Well, I think one of the unique things about Salt Lake Community College is, so we're right here in Salt Lake County, and the diversity of our student population is great. So in one graduating class a couple years ago, we had a 16-year-old and we had an 82-year-old. So we have to figure out ways to look at all different kinds of student populations and where they are in their life. And so I would say in terms of innovations, we have that in mind, the diversity of our students. One of the things we've adopted, and you heard a lot from President Mendenhall about competency-based education, that is significant for us. And different than WGU, a lot of our students are first-time learners. They're first-generation students. And so completely online learning is really not the best way for them to learn right now. It may be as they advance in their career, but as they get, just as becoming a member of a higher education institution, they need to be on campus. But competency-based is still very, very important. It shortens it. It focuses on the learning, as President Mendenhall mentioned, and it gets them out the door into a really nice paying job. So we're launching a lot of CBE, competency-based education, across our disciplines. Similarly, you've heard probably about the SLCC Promise and our open education resources initiatives. Those are all affordability initiatives to keep the cost of higher education down. So we are funding federal financial aid gaps internally through the institution to make access to higher ed available, and we're also getting rid of textbook costs for all of our students through open education resources. So students no longer have to buy textbooks. For many CTE programs, that can be very, very pricey. So we're trying to look at affordability and competency across spectrums to help meet the workforce demands. The other thing that I would mention is CBE is very good and helps in many of our disciplines. But what I haven't heard this morning is small business owners and how they generate workforce themselves. So we have a partnership with Goldman Sachs and Babson College where we host small business owners and put them through a very intensive module program to help them strengthen their small business and grow it, stay in Utah and grow the economy. So to date, we've graduated over 333 small business owners who then go back into their workforce and have received the tools they need to strengthen their workforce and to hire additional. And they run the gamut. They're in aerospace, they're in manufacturing, they're in hospitality, they're in medical fields. So they're meeting the economic clusters that we've identified as a state, but they're doing it in a small business way.
Thank you. And now I want to turn to the private side. LDS Business College has been doing a lot of work to meet over the years the needs of our workforce in the state. So Larry Richards, would you share with us some of the innovations that are going on there?
Thank you. I think maybe what might be valuable to this group is this idea that we've heard today a lot about education trying to take a connection between the market needs and what education's traditional role has been. And one of the things we're trying to break down is this idea in traditional education is that the only way you can learn about critical thinking and problem solving is through the liberal arts. And we don't buy that as a premise, and we prove that in our curriculum. One of the unique things that we do is we try to teach as much as we can using projects with real companies. So last year we did 350 projects for different companies in the state of Utah. And the premise there is you teach the students what they need to know in a discipline just in time to solve a problem, not just in case they may need the knowledge sometime in the future. That brings a relevance and an excitement to the educational experience that changes the dynamics of the classroom and begins to build these issues of teamwork and collaboration. Every time this is done with one of these projects, the students are actually out in the business. Then at the end of the semester, the client business comes in and the students give presentations to them. We've focused on small businesses where there can be a great impact. So that's one piece. The other piece is we really believe strongly in this idea of collaborating between educational institutions. And that's hard to do in a traditional sense. And so we've been grateful to work with Mike at the DATC to be able to provide for our students to go there and for his students to come to LDS Business College and round out their education. We only do 2-year degrees or less. We have training programs with 7 companies in the Valley, and we also have programs in 17 cities. We've also run a construction program in the middle of the DR Congo in Kinshasa and Lubumbashi. And the issue here is the ability to have companies who will actually tell us what they need with the guarantee, like we've heard in other places today, the guarantee that graduates will get a guaranteed interview, not the job, but the interview. Our placement rates at the institution, because we've really taken this skills-based focus, and these training programs, some of them last as short as 30 days and others 3 months. In the fall of 2015, fall semester, we placed 100% of the students who wanted to be placed. In winter semester, that's a bigger group and it's just a resource issue on our end, our certificate students, 86% were placed. Our 2-year degree students, 80% placed. So I think in summary, what we're trying to do is really focus on skills-based education for markets that need us and teach in such a way that there is this relevancy to the market needs.
Okay, thank you. I think that gives you a sense that all of these institutions are out there focused on thinking about how they help best meet the talent needs. They're focused on partnerships. They're focused on engagement with employers in very real ways. So I would like to pose this question. What are some of the challenges and opportunities in this work? What have we not tapped? What's keeping you from being able to do even more in this area that will allow us to continue to build this talent pool that we need in the state? And I want to do that just so you can help us identify what are some of the barriers and the issues we need to solve. And then I'm going to follow that up with what ideas do you have about kind of policy changes we need to make in order to be able to do this? So to help us get to some solutions that will support and help us achieve this in the state of Utah. So I think I will quickly, I'll start with you, Deneece, and we will just go down the panel.
You want to focus on the challenges first?
Let's start with the challenges first. I just wanted to key up the other questions so you could be thinking about it.
So you've heard some of these earlier, and I don't want to repeat prior panel members, but I'll underscore them. One is the speed of change. So higher education typically is not an institution that you think of as moving on a dime. Salt Lake Community College and the applied tech colleges are trying very desperately to do that very differently, and we're designed to do that differently. So although even though we're more responsive, the speed of change is still amazing, and we're constantly hearing from our industry partners, now there's something new, now there's something new, now there's something new that we need training on. So that's a huge challenge. I think you heard earlier on the panel, rebranding workforce to our younger generation, finding ways to entice them into careers that they might have not thought about, manufacturing, et cetera, that may have had an old school kind of perception but really needs to be rebranded. And we're working very hard through the Pathways programs that we're involved in to do that. And I'd also say in certain trainings, and you heard this earlier again, finding talent to teach it, especially in high tech. High tech, nobody wants to teach in high tech if they can be employed in high tech in Utah because the salary differential is so great. So I think we've got some work to do with our industry partners to say, how do you help us get, fabulous, relevant, appropriate teachers so that we can continually move that? But that's a barrier.
Okay, thank you.
I think one of the things I face as a president of the college is having all the employers come to me and say, I need employees right now. In the welding industry in our valley, there's 300 openings almost continuously. Just recently, we've had a fortune, and I don't know how it happened, but our welding enrollment skyrocketed over 250. I haven't seen that in my 40 years. But we have problems of trying to get people into the occupations that are high demand and even sometimes high wage, but low interest on the part of the students. That match is so critical. I can get all the students I need in allied health programs, in nursing. I can get all the students I need in cosmetology. But my demands are in the manufacturing, in machining, in IT. And that's where we need to work with the industry, as I mentioned, and learn how to manufacture employees. I have the same challenges. I can get teachers in business fairly easily. IT teachers, I'll have a position open for 4 months. And so that problem of getting the talent and the educational talent to teach those students is critical. The other problem we have is throughput. Our systems, as referenced earlier, the Pell system is based on seat time. And consequently, we teach in competency-based. So the students can have the capacity of going through quicker, but their finances do not keep up with them. Federal legislation needs to change to reward competencies, not seat time.
Okay, Larry?
One of the big struggles that we have at Snow College, and I think it's true throughout the whole Utah system of higher education, is we spend a lot of time remediating students once they come into to college. It's not unusual to have some students have to take 3 non-credit courses in order to be able to get their skills up to a level where they can just take the math that they need in order to have it count towards graduation. And it's not simply that they don't have good high school teachers or they have lousy school districts. That's not the case, or that the State Board of Education is not there. I'm not sure yet that as a state that we really truly value public education. We say we do. We get a lot of bang for our buck in this state out of family cohesiveness, but we don't do much to try to help out the school districts, and it's going to cost us. It's going to cost us financially, but if we invest in that, we're going to see a lot different kind of college graduate come out, and we're going to see industries immediately strengthened by that. One other area that we worry about is the number one reason that we lose students at Snow College is lack of financial support. We say that we have scholarships and grants and so on to be able to help them, but we have a large number of students that come for a year and then they're away for 2 years to work, and then they'll come back for another semester, and then they leave again, and so on. It causes problems for continuity for their own education, but it's also a problem for employers who want to make sure that they have people as they work with them and as they come on the shop floors and look and see what they're doing and so on. They want to make sure that these are kids that they can bring into their own workplaces. And so much of this has to do with looking at how federal financial aid applications and so on are done, and making sure that the federal government understands when a student completes a certificate, the aid can't stop. That's just one credential on the way to a degree.
Okay, thank you.
I think I would echo all that's been said. Student readiness for higher education continues to be a big deal. At our institution, 90% of the credit hours are taught by practicing professionals. They're not full-time. So one of the challenges we have, and we think helps connect education to the community, is to have practicing professionals who come in, and we've got the curriculum in a box, and they crack open the box, and they teach the curriculum, add their best knowledge to it, add additional learning objects to it, if you will, then close the box back up, and then we use it again. I think one of the other challenges we have that kind of leads to a policy issue is within the state, how well are we willing to let credentials from institutions travel from one institution to the next? We've heard a little bit, there's some little spots where this is happening, but the idea of the ATCs, the Applied Technology Colleges, and their ability for students who want to go on to really have those credentials that they take, go on to a four-year school. There just seems to be an opportunity to break the boundaries that exist between higher education and if I can be bold enough to say, sort of the academic arrogance that sometimes fits, that says, if it weren't built here, it ain't no good. And if we can get rid of some of that and recognize that we're all in this project together to help keep the state, as we've all learned and heard about this morning, growing and productive and keep businesses here and attract new businesses, I think that's a policy issue that needs to be addressed in a meaningful way in the state.
Okay, so you've spoken last twice. I'm going to let you, if you're interested, kind of think about this policy issues. What kinds of policies, if would you kind of recommend, both at the state and federal level, that we start to put in place to help us solve some of these issues that you've raised? And because I think you've all raised good issues. You've talked about school readiness, which is important. You've talked about kind of some of our funding models related to, particularly to competency-based education or to students being able to stack those credentials and how that works with federal funding. You've talked about the issue of how do we have high demand job areas. We know there are areas that people could get employed in, but that match of that student wanting to go into that field and helping them understand the possibilities of that field, and that it's a field that what I like to talk about is we can't just talk about college or career, we need to be talking about college and career. And that's something we continue to be able to build throughout our life, and I've heard some of that. And then I guess the fourth area I heard is, how do we get some of the faculty that we need that are cutting edge in some of these fields into our classrooms, and how do we approach that? So I'd be really interested in any thoughts you've had in terms of thinking through what are kind of policy changes that we could make at the state or federal level that would allow us to address those issues.
Well, one is, and we've seen the Department of Education try this a little bit, is this issue of competency-based education and taking federal financial aid out of this idea of seat time and moving it to what can a student do rather than what does a student only know. That's a really big one. I think the other piece is there are wonderfully competent people skilled in their fields, but we have this thing in education that unless you have a minimal of a master's degree or a PhD, you don't teach here. And if we can get away from that, it would help accomplish two things, quite frankly. We would get more practitioners in the field, and therefore closer ties between the marketplace and education. So I think then there's also another opportunity to think through about what constitutes curriculum and how the curriculum gets delivered and how much general education needs to be on the back of a 19 to 24-year-old. I'll just give you one little quick example. It's a question: when's the best time in your life, and how much should you pay to learn the difference between a Renoir and a Matisse? Is it when you're 19 to 24 and you're paying $135 or $235 a credit hour to sit through that? Or is it through Khan Academy that's free and the people who are teaching the course are actually curators of museums? I'm not using that as a castigation against what we do in higher education, just a realization of when's the best time and at the price. What's the best price to pay to receive some components of education in a young person or an older person's life? I'll stop there.
Thank you. Okay, Steve?
One thing that I think almost every institution of higher learning would like to see change is the FAFSA form, the Free Education for Federal Student Aid. It's not free. It's going to require a lot of time, and I see people rolling their eyes. If you have children, you know that you're going to need, at least 3 meals as you go through this form, and you're going to need a psychiatrist and a clergyman to help get you through it. It's almost 100 questions, and I think that we probably need about 10 is all to know. Know the personal information, know what the family level of wealth is and income, and how many children are in school. And instead, if you can imagine in some of these, for some of these households where a parent may not have finished high school or may be an immigrant, and they want their children to go to school, that is incredibly daunting. I mean, I did it with my kids, and I just thought, at one point I turned to my one child and said, man, I wish you were dumb, so I just didn't have to fill this thing out because it's just ridiculous. But it is unbelievably taxing, and all those questions don't have anything to do with anything. But it is absolutely essential in order to get the Pell Grant. So one thing I think on the state level we can do also in this regard is to help encourage Utah families. We are the lowest state when it comes to accepting Pell Grants. They're available and they're just not being taken. And part of that is because we're Westerners and we have a suspicion of the government, and so we don't want a government program. This is not just a handout. This is to help develop men and women to become educated, to learn a skill, and to be able to go out into the workforce and to give back to the community, to their families, and so on. It's absolutely essential. Another thing, at the state level, I would love to see, I think it's just a great idea that the state government has allocated money to the Utah System of Higher Education for the Regents Scholarship. If possible, I'd like to see that expanded even to allow more young men and women coming out of high school to be able to to have a couple of their years, some of that payment that they have to make eased somewhat so they can go to school. Then a somewhat unusual request. We have mandated by the state certain general education requirements that the Utah System of Higher Education has to comply with. I agree with the American Institution requirement. We should know that for citizenship. We should have a math requirement. We should have composition requirements. I don't think we need to have people take a humanities course, a social science course, an arts course, whatever. We need to have interdisciplinary conceptual ideas that they wrestle with. We can't waste our time just learning how a sociologist thinks about a particular problem, or a political scientist saying, I'm a political science guy, so I'll pick on us. That's okay, but we need to look and teach people how to think by looking at conceptual questions. So if the state could pull back on GE and let the institutions put together GE requirements that follows a little bit more what the Western consortium of colleges has put together, we can have a great general education program that will prepare students for jobs far better than what we're doing now.
More interdisciplinary, problem focused, kind of the world's problems don't kind of fit in nice, neat little disciplines. They're definitely interdisciplinary. Thank you. Mike.
One of the things I think that is important for me at the state level and the federal level is to be able to encompass what we're talking about today with reliable and quick funding sources. In other words, we're on the cutting edge with employers. We have 600 employers that we work with that either hire our students or on advisory committees. They tell us the direction we should go. And so they'll say, we want this innovative program. Then I have to pigeonhole that into some kind of a resource. I either have to go to the legislature and ask for growth money, or I have to go to the federal government, which is very hard to do, and get innovation money. The programs that Matt Wardle talked about, those are programs that we're jointly developing together. Now, how do we fund it? They have a piece, we have a piece. The accreditation bodies have to be able to accept those pieces as part of the curriculum. But we've got to find innovative ways of funding these ideas, these requirements that employers bring to us every day. It took me 7 years to get a plastic injection molding program. And all the industry was begging for it year after year. We just had to find, the UCAP program is the closest to it, but it's one-time money. So you get it going and you have to figure out how you're going to backfill it. The other thing we're doing, and Deneece is involved with this as well, the federal government's allowed us to experiment with competency-based education. We are one of 2 colleges across the nation and universities, there's not that many, that are allowed to experiment and show that we can increase our throughput and get people through quicker and out to the employers when we pay for competency-based rather than seat time. If they'll let us run with that, if they'll give us the discretion and the trust to administer their federal money that way, make a major difference in the throughput of all of our organizations.
Yeah,
Okay, thank you. Deneece?
I would just echo that. The CBE, federal financial aid funding, is a big, big deal, and it could really change the picture of higher education if the DOE will allow us to do that. So we are very involved in that and looking forward to hoping that will widen. And I would also say, in terms of the federal level, a year-round Pell. So our students are they're very dependent on Pell, and Steve's right when he says Utah is one of the lowest in terms of Pell and FAFSA completion. Families just don't complete it. There's all of this federal money sitting out there that our students, that you do not have to pay back, that does not contribute to loan debt, that our students are not accessing because of either an unwieldy form and some suspicion. And I think Utah State and the feds need to help really widen that FAFSA completion. So those are the federal things I would look at. On a state level, I just want to point out 2 things. First of all, Senator Millner's bill, Senate Bill 103, was a great example last year, last year about workforce partnership funding and incentivizing higher education institutions to work with industry partners in economic clusters with high demand to find solutions to this very issue. So she ran a bill which was successful, which gives us the funding we need to hire, where our request is focused on IT, and will really help us strengthen that pipeline in IT quickly. So that's a funding lever that was pulled through the state house, which was great, the state policymakers. But on the other side, if you look at the match issue that Michael talked about, we may have that funding, and in IT is a little sexier than manufacturing sometimes. So students might walk into that IT program, but what if we incentivize students into some of those high demand areas to go into them and have loan and debt forgiveness? I know my nephew just graduated from med school after what seemed like 14 years of school. The guy just was always in the books, and he stayed in a great job because one of the things in that job was they were going to forgive his medical school debt. And that was a significant part of his decision. So Senator Millner and I have talked, and others have talked about, what if we look at some loan forgiveness at the state level for students who go into these high-demand, high-need industries, where we say to them up front, we need you, you'll be employed, and if you stay in this field and get employed, we'll help pay off some of your loan debt.
You know, Senator Millner, just one
right ahead.
additive to both of these. Your bill is the first time I think the state legislature has said, if you'll do this, we'll build it into your base budget. So it will be ongoing. It's horrible to set up a program for a company that you want to last for 5 to 10 years and then not be able to fund it the second year. That's so critical to what we do. That's a first step, and that's a great move.
Okay, well, so thank you all very much. Here's kind of, this is what I heard. First of all, we need to work at the federal level on our federal financial aid program, make it more responsive to competency-based education, simplify the process, and perhaps at the state, find ways to be able to encourage our students to enroll in this. We need to find some ways that perhaps in some of these high demand areas, we make it even more appealing to our students by finding ways to say, if you go through the program, if you work in these fields, we'll find a way to do some loan forgiveness, and maybe that could be an industry and state partnership in terms of being able to do that, and maybe create a revolving loan fund in a sense, because we might be able to create something pretty unique to help us be able to respond to particular needs. That we need to be thinking about curriculum reform, and how do we think about the world in a different way, that it's more problem focused, that's more interdisciplinary. We know with the critical skills skills are, but maybe we can teach them by thinking about our curriculum in different ways to help us to build those human relations, team building, critical thinking, problem solving skills that we all know our employers are looking at that's so critically important. And then how do we try to create some flexibility in our funding sources that will allow us to be able to respond more quickly, and maybe even to help us think about how do we get some of these high demand, and some of these high demand fields, get the right faculty and rethink some of the credentials. Did I miss anything? If you had one of those that you'd say, this is where we ought to start. I know Senator Lee, Senator Lee, I know, is focused on solutions in this, and he wants this to be an ongoing collaborative conversation about how do we take a deeper dive in actually solving these. If you were making a recommendation for him at the federal level, what would that one recommendation be?
You know, my recommendation, and I echo this again, with all the federal money that we get, we have flow-through money that seems to be declining, and it is used in ways that aren't instrumental in meeting the needs of industry. They're so cumbersome sometimes, and they're so onerous in terms of tracking a student to the very end, that we end up using the federal money for equipment, which is a good use, but we need to have the federal government respond to this new culture of employers and education working together and creating new programs. That's a whole different model than the last 100 years. It's very important to fund that.
Yeah, I would say federal financial aid. I mean, there's a lot of work we can do there.
Realignment of, and what I'm hearing is, let's focus on how we realign it, how we make it so we can do competency-based, how do we simplify it, et cetera, so we're really able to help us meet these needs. Okay.
Here's one that we haven't touched on and we
Okay.
don't have time, but it is the Department of Education in Washington's relationship with regional accreditors and how that relationship should work, and whether education, higher education in the United States should be controlled in Washington or through other means. And I think
Right.
that's a real opportunity.
And Senator Lee has some legislation that's focused on trying to address, provide some options for states to be able to have more of a role in that accreditation process. And I think he talked about that earlier. So really another important piece of this. How do we create the flexibility at state level to be able to respond to our needs as a state and our workforce needs? Thank you all very much. I really appreciate the opportunity to have this conversation with you, and let's give them all a round of applause.
Thank you, Annie.